Hello, this is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major news stories in the week ending. I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. British Prime Minister David Cameron has said the choice before Britain, the June 23rd referendum election, is a choice of a lifetime that must be well thought out in the interest of Britain. This has come as the government was accused of spending over £9 million of taxpayers' money on pro-EU campaigns.
Yes, it's frustrating, the European Union, and I can tell you, as the person who sits around that table till often 3 or 4 in the morning negotiating complex deals, it can be incredibly frustrating. But the fact that we talk to each other, the fact we work with each other, the fact that we try and collaborate and cooperate to tackle the problems and issues that we face as countries is so much better than what came before. And we should never forget that whereas our continent had been racked by war and conflict, we have found a way now to talk to each other, to work together. And that is something, when we think about this vote, which is not just for our generation, but it's for our children and our grandchildren, something that I hope we'll think about. Thank you again for the welcome. I look forward to the questions. Whatever you decide to do, please do vote in 78 days' time. People say there's a lot of issues of sovereignty at stake in this referendum. Well, this is a giant act of sovereignty. You, the British people, are going to decide, do we stay in or do we get out? I hope you vote to stay in, particularly after the negotiation I concluded. But it's your choice. I will obey the orders that you give me on June the 23rd. Thank you very much. Right. Okay, questions, points? We've got some from the press here as well. Let's have the lady behind me. So, here comes a microphone. You may not need it, but just so they get you all the way up there.
Hi, Eleanor Perfect. I'm the EU grants lead for PwC UK. So I work with PwC clients to access Horizon 2020 funding. What's the plan if we vote to leave to mitigate
Very good point. In case everybody doesn't know, the Horizon 2020 programme, that is the money particularly for universities, where Britain actually does extremely well out of science and technology and university funding. If we look at the West Midlands as a whole, I think there's about £700 million worth of European regional funding coming into the West Midlands between now and 2020. Now, of course, if we left the EU, we would have to make sure we funded science in our universities and we had the other regional funds equivalent to those things. But, we can't guarantee what it would be. And in a way, it's a question for the Out campaign to answer. Would you replicate the very important funding that's going into British universities, or wouldn't you? But it is interesting that British universities, by and large, are solidly behind staying in a reformed European Union. And also there's this point. If we left the EU, it's pretty clear, and the Bank of England has said this, there'd be a shock to our economy, and we would suffer in terms of a fall in our currency, a fall in our GDP, in our output, and we'd be less able to fund vital science and other projects like the Horizon programme. So if we stay in, we know what we're going to get. And we know that we can keep on winning for British universities, for British science. If we get out, we can't guarantee that. Let's have a couple more before we go to the press. Gentleman here.
Thank you very much. Phil Harold, PwC. I lead our automotive practice in the UK, and the automotive industry is in the best health it's been for over 40 years. What's the government going to do to maintain conditions for that health?
Well, I think, look, it is a really big success story. If I think back to my childhood and what was going on in the motor industry then and all the difficulties we had in the 70s, you can see a situation transformed. We are now the third largest manufacturer of automotive vehicles, of cars, in the European Union, after Germany and Spain. We actually make more cars in the northeast of our country, principally Nissan, than they do in the whole of Italy. So this is a huge success story for Britain. And I would argue the success is based on great design and manufacturing skills, very good industrial relations. But it's also based on the fact that we are part of the European Union. And so the companies that come and invest here, whether it's an Indian company in the case of Jaguar Land Rover, or whether it is the Japanese companies, Nissan and Honda and Toyota, they come and invest here knowing they have complete access to that single market. Now, if we went for a Canada-style trade deal, we'd have to meet all sorts of rules about the origin of all the parts of our cars, and we wouldn't necessarily get that tariff-free access to the single market. So if you put yourself in the mind of the Japanese car company or Tata's future investment in terms of Jaguar Land Rover, what would be better? Is it better to stay in a reformed European Union, knowing you've got access to that market, or is it better to take a risk? It must be better to stay in. And I know if we vote to stay in, we'll continue to support the car industry in the way that we have. I think that what we're doing, particularly on apprenticeships and skills, is a really, really strong future for that industry, and I want to see it grow. And you have to think through what would happen on June the 24th and afterwards if we vote to come out. We're then going to spend years trying to renegotiate our relationship with Europe, and that is going to lead to huge uncertainty. And if there's one thing businesses hate, it is uncertainty and a lack of knowledge about what the access to the market is going to be. So I think it's a good example of why we should vote to stay in on June the 23rd. Lady here.
Sarah Marshall, PwC. The Midlands engine has been mentioned in the last 2 consecutive budgets without a lot of detail being out there. If we stay in, how will you ensure that we remain top of the agenda?
Very important point. I would say, I sometimes think the West Midlands thinks that it's going to miss out because of this thing called the Northern Powerhouse. And I think that's mistaken thinking. I think for a long time in our country, we've been too unbalanced in terms of too much of the economic activity has been in London and the South East. And the Northern Powerhouse is not about favouring the North over the West Midlands. It's about trying to rebalance the whole country and to create an alternative centre of strength and excellence in manufacturing and in universities and transport and all the rest of it, to make us a more balanced country. And that actually is of huge benefit to the West Midlands, because West Midlands will then draw its strength not only from the fact that Birmingham is the country's second city, but also its connectivity to London and the south, and to Manchester and Leeds and Liverpool in the north. It will draw strength from both. And at the same time, we are putting a lot of investment into Birmingham. And if you think of one of the biggest investments this government's made over the last 5 years, it's actually the complete renewal of Birmingham New Street Station, something that was absolutely vital for our country. The biggest project coming up next is HS2, which I think has got huge benefits for Birmingham, not just in terms of journey speed and capacity, but also big regeneration of key parts of Birmingham. So I think you'll hear a lot more about the West Midlands engine. And I think you'll also see this coming together of the local authorities in the West Midlands to try and form one West Midlands authority with one mayoral figure who I think will be able to help drive the investment that's needed in the West Midlands. So I think it's a very positive picture. If you put together transport, connectivity and the governance that's going to change, I think it's a very strong picture.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister David Cameron has denied any link to the Panama offshore accounts leak. The Prime Minister stated that he had no shares, no offshore trust, and no offshore funds. He said the country's tax authority, the HMRC, will use the information coming out from the Panama leak to strengthen the UK's tax system.
What we need, the investigation we need, first of all, is for HMRC, our tax authority, to use all the information that is coming out of Panama to make sure that everything's done, to make sure that companies and individuals are paying their taxes properly. In many ways, what's coming out of Panama is actually what we're introducing in our own country, which is a register of beneficial ownership, so everyone can see who owns what company. As for the 2 things I'm responsible for are my own financial affairs and for the tax system of the United Kingdom. In terms of my own financial affairs, I own no shares. I have a salary as Prime Minister, and I have some savings, which I get some interest from, and I have a house which we used to live in, which we now let out while we're living in Downing Street. And that's all I have. I have no shares, no offshore trusts, no offshore funds, nothing like that. And so that, I think, is a very clear description. The second thing I'm responsible for is, of course, our tax system and for international tax policy. And I would say that no government, no Prime Minister has done more to make sure we crack down on tax evasion, on aggressive tax avoidance, on aggressive tax planning, both here in the UK and internationally. So we have recovered billions of pounds in our country by changing tax regulations and rules in budget after budget, billions of pounds. But we've also led the world in making sure we have, which we'll have in June, an open register of beneficial ownership so everyone can see who owns what in Britain. We haven't just done that here in the UK, we've also pioneered that abroad. We've said, for instance, to the overseas territories and crown dependencies that they have to have the automatic exchange of tax information, they have to have a single standard for reporting company taxation, and they too need to do registers of beneficial ownership. And we made huge progress on that with the overseas territories, with the crown dependencies, and other countries as well. I started this at the G8 summit in Northern Ireland some years ago, and we've now got country after country sharing tax information, committing to beneficial ownership registers, which we never had before. Is there more to do? Absolutely. Am I committed to doing it? Absolutely. And the anti-corruption summit that we're holding in London on May the 12th will yet another sort of mark along the way of making sure we deliver on this absolutely vital agenda. We have low taxes here in Britain, but low taxes that people must pay. And that is our agenda, and we're going to stick to it.
US President Barack Obama has announced that his government has put in place measures to enforce tax laws in a fair manner, crack down on offshore tax evasion, and ensure the big corporations do not renege on their responsibilities to the American people.
You know, as I travel around the country, what always stands out is the fact that the overwhelming majority of folks work hard and they play by the rules. And they deserve to see their hard work rewarded. They also deserve to know that big corporations aren't playing by a different set of rules, that the wealthiest among us aren't able to game the system. That's why I've been pushing for years to eliminate some of the injustices in our tax system. So I am very pleased that the Treasury Department has taken new action to prevent more corporations from taking advantage of one of the most insidious tax loopholes out there and fleeing the country just to get out of paying their taxes. This got some attention in the business press yesterday, but I wanted to make sure that we highlighted the importance of Treasury's action and why it did what it did. This directly goes at what's called corporate inversions. They are not new. Simply put, in layman's terms, it's when big corporations acquire small companies and then change their address to another country on paper in order to get out of paying their fair share of taxes here at home. As a practical matter, they keep most of their actual business here in the United States because they benefit from American infrastructure and technology and rule of law. They benefit from our research and our development and our patents. They benefit from American workers who are best in the world, but they effectively renounce their citizenship. They declare that they're based somewhere else, thereby getting all the rewards of being an American company without fulfilling the responsibilities to pay their taxes the way everybody else is supposed to pay them. When companies exploit loopholes like this, it makes it harder to invest in the things that are going to keep America's economy going strong for future generations. It sticks the rest of us with the tab, and it makes hardworking Americans feel like the deck is stacked against them. So this is something that I've been pushing for a long time. Since I became president, we've made our tax code fair, and we've taken steps to make sure our tax laws are actually enforced, including leading efforts to crack down on offshore evasion. I will say that it gets tougher sometimes when the IRS is starved for resources and squeezed by the congressional appropriation process so that there are not enough people to actually pay attention to what all the lawyers and accountants are doing all the time. But we have continued to emphasize the importance of basic tax enforcement. In the news over the last couple of days, we've had another reminder in this big dump of data coming out of Panama that tax avoidance is a big global problem. It's not unique to other countries because, frankly, there are folks here in America who are taking advantage of the same stuff. A lot of it's legal, but that's exactly the problem. It's not that they're breaking the laws, it's that the laws are so poorly designed that they allow people, if they've got enough lawyers and enough accountants, to wiggle out of responsibilities that ordinary citizens are having to abide by. Here in the United States, there are loopholes that only wealthy individuals and powerful corporations have access to. They have access to offshore accounts, and they are gaming the system. Middle-class families are not in the same position to do this. In fact, a lot of these loopholes come at the expense of middle-class families because that lost revenue has to be made up somewhere. Alternatively, it means that we're not investing as much as we should in schools, in making college more affordable, in putting people back to work, rebuilding our roads, our bridges, our infrastructure, creating more opportunities for our children. So this is important stuff, and these new actions by the Treasury Department build on steps that we've already taken to make the system fairer, but I want to be clear. While the Treasury Department actions will make it more difficult and less lucrative for companies to exploit this particular corporate inversions loophole, only Congress can close it for good. And only Congress can make sure that all the other loopholes that are being taken advantage of are closed. I've often said the best way to end this kind of irresponsible behavior is with tax reform that lowers the corporate tax rate, closes wasteful loopholes, simplifies the tax code for everybody. And in recent years, I've put forward plans repeatedly that would make our tax system more competitive for all businesses, including small businesses. So far, Republicans in Congress have yet to act. My hope is that they start getting serious about it. When politicians perpetuate a system that favors the wealthy at the expense of the middle class, it's not surprising that people feel like they can't get ahead. It's not surprising that oftentimes it may produce a politics that is directed at that frustration. Rather than doubling down on policies that let a few big corporations or the wealthiest among us play by their own rules, we should keep building an economy where everybody has a fair shot and everybody plays by the same rules. Rather than protect wasteful tax loopholes for the few at the top, we should be investing more in things like education and job creation and job training that we know grow the economy for everybody. And rather than lock in tax breaks for millionaires or make it harder to actually enforce existing laws, let's give tax breaks to help working families pay for child care or for college. And let's stop rewarding companies that are shipping jobs overseas and profit overseas and start rewarding companies that create jobs right here at home and are good corporate citizens.
143 politicians from 50 countries and 12 heads of states have been named in the recent leak of data from a law firm in the tax haven of Panama. The leak has claimed its first casualty, Iceland Prime Minister, who was forced to resign over millions of dollars hidden in offshore accounts.
11 million documents were leaked from the Panama-based law firm Mossack Fonseca. Anti-corruption activists say the leak has revealed how the rich and powerful use tax havens like Panama to avoid taxes, hide corruption, or to avoid sanctions.
What we see is that it's very easy for people that want to hide their identity to set up secret shell companies in a variety of jurisdictions, and that's essentially to hide their connection to the money.
12 heads of state are named among 143 politicians from 50 countries. Leaked papers suggest Iceland's Prime Minister Sigmundur Gunnlaugsson hid millions of dollars of undeclared investments in Icelandic banks through an offshore company. He is now facing calls to resign. The leak also names top communist officials in China, including the family of President Xi Jinping. Argentina's President Mauricio Macri is accused of holding undeclared wealth in the Bahamas. And the documents indicate Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko set up a secret offshore company in the British Virgin Islands in August 2014, even as Ukrainian troops were battling Russian-backed rebels in the east at the height of the conflict. The leaks also reveal a suspected multi-billion-dollar money laundering ring run through Bank Rossiya, which is run by close associates of Russian President Vladimir Putin and is currently subject to US and EU sanctions. The law firm at the centre of the leak, Mossack Fonseca, has strongly denied breaking any laws. Activists want further investigations.
If it's money laundering, if it's sanctions busting, if it's tax evasion, that is definitely illegal. One of the things that we've seen is that there are over 23 clients of this company are on international sanctions lists.
Most of the data concerns more secretive, wealthy individuals from across the globe attempting to hide their money.
The funds that are being transferred around the global financial system require bankers, lawyers, accountants. Now here in the City of London we have to figure out whether we're happy with our role in the transfer of this corrupt money, and that's a very serious question that the UK government and others need to answer.
Global leaders will seek those answers at an anti-corruption summit hosted by British Prime Minister David Cameron in May, but several of his Conservative Party lawmakers and donors have been named in the leaked papers, along with his late father, who allegedly sheltered family wealth through an offshore company in the Bahamas.
There has been a temporary setback to Republican frontrunner Donald Trump's victories as Ted Cruz scores big. Democrat Bernie Sanders also closed the gap with Hillary Clinton.
For Texas Senator Ted Cruz, it was his biggest victory yet in the primary campaign, and a major setback for Republican frontrunner Donald Trump.
Tonight is a turning point. It is a rallying cry. It is a call from the hardworking men and women of Wisconsin to the people of America. We have a choice, a real choice. I am more and more convinced that our campaign is going to earn the 1,237 delegates needed to win the Republican nomination.
Trump suffered perhaps his worst defeat yet, a loss that blunted his momentum and made it more likely that Republicans will have a contested nominating convention in Cleveland in July. Trump issued a statement blasting Cruz as a Trojan horse working for the Republican establishment to steal away the nomination. Trump did not hold any public events after his Wisconsin loss, but spoke to reporters earlier in the day at a polling location.
We actually have a very, very good campaign going. I'm number one by a lot. And you know, the thing that nobody talks about are the votes. I'm millions of votes more than anybody else.
Ohio Governor John Kasich finished a distant third. In the Democratic race, it was another big night for Bernie Sanders in his bid to catch frontrunner Hillary Clinton.
If we wake up the American people, and if working people and middle-class people and senior citizens and young people begin to stand up, fight back, and come out and vote in large numbers, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish.
Sanders has now won 6 of the last 7 contests over Clinton, who campaigned Tuesday in New York, ahead of its primary on April 19th. In addition to Sanders, Clinton also is focused on Donald Trump.
Too many people are trying to divide Americans against Americans. I wish they'd all come to New York and spend time. And the fellow who's from New York, I wish he'd get out of one of his towers and actually walk the streets and spend time with the people of this city.
Thank you all very much.
Despite Sanders' momentum, Clinton continues to hold a lead in the overall delegate count in the Democratic race.
And with that story, we conclude the news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of the program. I'm Tunde Alabi. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye. Our continued efforts to reach the African and other ethnic communities in the United Kingdom with greater impacts and create the platform to hear your silent and unheard views in this hugely growing community in the United Kingdom. Our channel, Ben TV, presents to you another live current affairs television program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you that unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Another business segment of Dialogue in Diaspora, 2 to 3 p.m. every Monday. But guess what? You know you can be part of the program. Just send us an email at bentelevisionuk@gmail.com. Dialogue in Diaspora, your voice, your opinion on our TV.